Well, hello there folks, this is Scott once again and welcome to another video. This time I'm going to be wrapping up the Naked Gun trilogy with the second one, The Naked Gun 2.5, The Smell of Fear. Don't know if you can tell, that's this one here, and obviously you can tell it's in the middle. And while I grew up on the Naked Gun films, I actually never saw this sequel a whole lot, but overall it's still a very fun and engaging sequel because it still has all the laughs, it has the gags and slapstick that you would expect from this film, and they take it up a notch as well. And yeah, I just, for it being like 28 years old, it still holds up very well. This probably would not get made today. But you know what? I'm gonna get right to the info, and based on the Wikipedia info that I'm reading here, start with the crew and cast. We have David Zucker returns to direct this film, along with producer Robert K. Weiss. Zucker also writes the film along with Pat Proft, and you have most of the cast members coming back. You have Leslie Nielsen reprising his role as Frank Drebin, Priscilla Presley as Jane Spencer, George Kennedy as Ed Hocken. You have O.J. Simpson reprising his role as Nordberg, and then you have Ed Williams reprising his role as Ted Olson, the scientist, that has all these nice little gadgets invented and also can determine, he's a scientist or criminal scientist pretty much. But anyways, the new cast members that are introduced in this film, you have Robert Goulet, who plays Hapsburg. He's the main villain in this film. You have Richard Griffiths as Dr. Albert S. Meinheimer, and as well as the false version of him, which is Earl Hacker. You also have Jacqueline Brooks as Commissioner Annabelle Brunford. You also have Anthony James as Hector Savage. Excuse me. You also have Lloyd Buckner as Terrence Baggett, Tim O'Connor as Donald Fenswick, and then the other new actor that comes in there, I've seen him before in a few other things. His name is Peter Mark Richman. He played the asshole, uptight uncle in Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan, if anyone has seen that film. And he also appeared in an episode of Star Trek The Next Generation Season 1 in the very last episode. I think he was in some other things, but I can't remember off the top of my head. Now, I forgot to mention, Weird Al Yankovic does appear in this film in a very small cameo, so I was wrong in my previous video, but I'll get to that. And basically, the film did very well at the box office. I forgot to mention that music was still done by Ira Newborn. He pretty much did all the Naked Gun films, unless if it's a woman. Forgive me, I might be wrong, but it might be a man. But anyway, it didn't deter me from enjoying the film. It was still distributed by Paramount Pictures. I'm guessing that's why Peter Mark Richman did those two projects that I mentioned, because they were associated with Paramount. But anyways, the film did reasonably well. The budget was $23 million. It made nearly $87 million. So apparently this was actually the highest grossing one of all the three. And I can see why. It probably had a great riot right there. But anyways, getting to the plot, you have Frank Drebin, Leslie Nielsen. He's being honored at the White House, where George H.W. Bush, and I forgot to mention this, John Rourke, and you also have Barbara Bush there, who's played by Marjorie Ross, and they both, the actors and actresses that did this roles, they got the resemblance down to almost a T, so I gotta give them credit on that. But anywho, Frank is being congratulated on his 1,000th drug bust, and he also is apparently the president's trying to base his recommendation on the country's energy program on Dr. Albert Meinheimer's advice, which is going to be revealed at the speech at the National Press Club dinner the following week. But unfortunately, the heads of the coal and oil and nuclear industries are pretty much, under duress because of the fact that Dr. Meinheimer is pretty much an advocate for renewable energy. And while this is going on, we see that Jane Spencer, who has been separated from Frank for a good while, and she's actually kind of mourning him in a way. She's actually working for Dr. Meinheimer, and they actually have a bit of a conversation about trying to move on and stuff like that. And then during all this, before Meinheimer arrives, she actually spots a man running away, leaving in a red van, who will later turn out to be Savage. And then one of the maintenance workers actually discovers a clock with dynamite attached in one of the trash cans and actually takes to the security guards. They all think that, it's out of time, and they actually wind it up, and they actually end up, triggering the explosion and killing them. Then the next morning, Frank, basically has been tasked with the investigation and reacquaints himself with Jane, trying to, get some info about the explosion. He's also shown around by the Institute with Jane, and also Meinheimer also shows him around. Before he encounters this further, he also, he encounters and meets up Jane's new boyfriend, Hexagon Oil executive Quentin Hapsburg, which is Robert Goulet's character. And of course, Frank already takes an immediate dislike to him, and Frank's going through the motions. He actually attends this lonely blues bar where both Ed and actually Jane meet up with him, and of course Jane, begins to learn more about what happened. Remembers a little bit more about the man she saw leave in the van and all that stuff. But apparently Frank, quickly wants to get rid of her any chance he can, and it basically ruins his chance with her. And meanwhile, while this is going on, apparently Robert Goulet's character, Hapsburg, reveals that he's kidnapped the actual Dr. Meinheimer and has found an exact double for him, which is, of course, the same actor, Earl Hacker. And the false one will apparently appear at the press club dinner to pretty much, endorse the fossil, coal, and nuclear fuel deals at the dinner. And then apparently, later on, police squad eventually tracks down the van driver, Hector Savage, which is Anthony James' character. At first, he tries to hide out for a little bit at the sex shop, but they eventually catch on. And both Frank and Ed try to go in there trying to get the information out of this one lady, while Nordberg actually tries to go in the van and try to tag on a tracer, but unfortunately he gets caught, and actually he ends up being driven while he's underneath that vehicle for a good while. And then eventually Frank and Ed try to chase him down, but somehow Nordberg is able to get out of there. But eventually he actually comes with a tracer and goes underneath I guess Frank's vehicle, and gets stuck underneath there. And eventually he goes underneath a bus for a while, and then eventually Ed and Frank track down Savage to this one location at a house, and they both blow it up or shoot it down pretty good. And while Savage tries to make these demands, Frank goes into this SWAT tank and inadvertently drives through the house that Savage is in, and that allows Savage to escape. He causes more damage to some more houses, and then he loses control of the tank and ends up crashing into a city zoo, breaking into a wall, and it allows pretty much all the animals to escape. Then eventually, when they're at this party, he encounters Hapsburg again, and the false Dr. Meinheimer, who actually doesn't remember him instantly, despite the fact that Jane told him that Meinheimer usually has a pretty good photographic memory. And Frank also tries to, before chaos ensues, Frank actually dances with her briefly and tries to warn her about her new boyfriend being up to no good, and of course Jane dismisses it as typical ex-boyfriend's jealousy. And then whenever Meinheimer is supposed to be, giving a speech at this party, Frank tries to roll him in, and even though the false Meinheimer tells him no, Frank turns around and looks and notices that Hapsburg and Jane are kind of sharing an intimate kiss, and unbeknownst to him, he runs into Major D, kind of runs into him, or he runs into them. Anyways, the soup spills on him, on his crotch area, and then also spills on the freaking control of the wheelchair, and it starts to go haywire. And they both Frank are caught in these compromising positions, and eventually Frank's thrown off, and eventually the wheelchair goes into overkill, like the tires squeal, and he ends up being flying out of the window. And eventually you see him on the silhouette against the moon, kind of referencing the Amblin logo or E.T. or something. Then afterwards, Frank attempts to go to her apartment to try to make up, but she's still not having it. But moments later, Savage attempts to kill Jane and eventually Frank, but luckily since Frank, was aware of Savage, he's able to fight with him and actually kill him, end up killing him by sticking a fire hose down his mouth and turning it on full blast. And then after some even more explanation, Jane realizes that Frank was right, and eventually they rekindle their romance. Then the next day, apparently, Frank, the police squad attempts to take on stake out the Hexagon Oil headquarters. I don't know if I mentioned this, but Hexagon is run by Hapsburg and all that good stuff. And Frank tries to break in by first, swimming into some raw sewage, and then eventually he, further disguises himself as kind of like a criminal wearing all black and all that, and tries to shoot a harpoon not once but twice to try to get into the building. And but unfortunately he encounters some very mean dogs and falls into where the henchmen are at, and both Frank and Dr. Meinheimer are both tied down. Well, Meinheimer is technically tied down, mouth gagged and all that stuff. But eventually they're freed by police squad despite, having a few setbacks. And then apparently the police squad, or mainly the police squad of Frank, Ed, Nordberg, and actually the doctor himself, Meinheimer, actually try to get in. They were supposed to meet Jane, but unfortunately Hapsburg is able to get away from the back door, and they're locked out. But luckily Frank, Ed, and Nordberg and Dr. Meinheimer see this mariachi band, and they get the idea they can get into their costumes, and that's what they end up doing. They try playing a piece of music. And then apparently when Frank, somehow he encounters the false Meinheimer and gets into a fight with him, pretty much, but some other people see this and they realize that maybe he's attacking a helpless guy, and Frank ends up, getting pushed away and probably beaten up for that. And then somehow when I believe Ed's backstage somewhere, the false professor of the false doctor, Meinheimer, tries to kill Ed by choking him, but luckily behind the false one, Meinheimer is actually to chop two ropes. One actually knocks out Ed, and the second time knocks out the false professor or doctor, whichever one. But anyways, while Frank's in this daze, the actual Meinheimer tries to give a press conference, and Frank, thinking that's actually the false one instead, tries to embarrass him and all that stuff by saying he doesn't have a birthmark, which this one does. But I'll get to the gag moments later on. And eventually he's able to. But when Hapsburg sees this, he ends up fleeing and taking Jane with him. And then apparently after a shootout on the roof from the building, they're in some other building or some area of the building where Hapsburg actually informs Frank he's actually breaking the building with a small nuclear device which would kill everyone, including Dr. Meinheimer, except for him, of course. But luckily he's distracted whenever Nordberg tries to intervene, but he ends up knocking himself out. And then Frank and Hapsburg end up fighting, and then Frank demands to know the bomb's disarming code, and actually Hapsburg attempts to give it to him, but Ed intervenes and then actually unintentionally knocks out Hapsburg out of Frank's arms. But Hapsburg actually hits an awning down below and is able to come to the sidewalk unscathed, but right after he's about to walk off, he's killed immediately by an escaped lion from the zoo, which just jumps on him and kills him right then. Then Frank and Jane intend to disarm the bomb. Then Ed and Nordberg go back to the ballroom to attempt to evacuate it. And after several failed attempts of trying to disarm the bomb, somehow Frank manages to disarm the bomb by just, tripping over the power cord and unplugging it. And as a result, Frank is commissioned by the president and is praised by Commissioner Annabelle for his efforts. And the president tries to offer him as a special post at the police squad, but he declines. He claims he wants to be the environmental Frank, and I'll get to the funny lines momentarily. He instead asks Jane to marry him, which she accepts, and then that's pretty much your ending, except for the ensuing gag that follows right after. So basically on this film review, I really still enjoy this sequel. It's still fun as hell, I feel like maybe I'll get to the con. There's the only slight con maybe is I wish maybe we could have gotten a little bit of a backstory on the villain, and I felt like at times maybe there's a few editing problems that I think I had, but other than that, I really enjoyed this sequel. I think it's just as good, and I can see why this did very well. But I'll definitely get to the pros. The gags and jokes, the one-liners, and the slapstick humor still works very well. It still holds up well to this day. Like in the very beginning, like right in the beginning, when you see, the president and Lady Bush, and whenever Frank enters, he actually enters, and we don't see him just yet. But when he opens the door and knocks out the Barbara Bush, and then whenever Frank actually is going to the main table, the dinner table, if you will, and he sees this one good-looking woman, he thinks he's gonna try to pull a seat for her, but not noticing, Barbara Bush comes in, and when Frank pulls out the seat, she falls down and she actually grabs onto the tablecloth, pulling all the silverware and the dishes. And then, right when the president's giving his speech, and then when Commissioner Annabelle is like praising him for his 1,000th drug bust, he then makes a little note of he actually hit 2 people with his car, and he said, luckily they turned out to be drug dealers. And then whenever Frank is eaten, he actually eats the huge lobster. Apparently everyone else gets like normal sized lobster, but he was eating the much humongous one. I guess it was meant for someone else, but he ends up eating it. And when he's trying to take the claws off, like some of the juice flies out because he was sitting next to Commissioner Annabelle. The juice flies out at her, and then he's trying to dig more into the meat, and its claw starts moving closer and actually grabs Commissioner Annabelle's breast. And then whenever he's trying to add some lemon juice to the lobster, the lemon like flies off to this one lady, which is actually, I think, I forget what their Mandela, the lady Mandela's wife, I think it was, on her clothing that's on her head. And then he tries to squeeze another lemon and it actually flies off somewhere. And then when he's trying to get more of the claw off, he accidentally knocks out Barbara Bush again. And then there was moments whenever he first encounters Quentin Hapsburg where he's like, hey, yeah, I know you. I've visited one of your bathrooms or something like that. And Hapsburg is like, I'm sure you have. And then whenever he notices him and Jane are together, he's like, he's like, we can handle this like civilized adults, don't you think, Mr. Poopy Pants? It's just hilarious. And then whenever him and Jane try to make up at the blues bar, he's still kind of bitter, and he's like, I don't. Whenever Jane wants to be friends or whatever, and Frank doesn't want to go that route and calls her out on her BS and whatnot. Jane tries to slap him, but Frank blocks it, and then she tries to slap him from the other side. He blocks it. He's like, Kitty likes to scratch or whatever, but apparently 2 other hands like slap him. And then he's like, when Jane's like, oh, I made a mistake, I shouldn't have come here. He's like, sorry, my nose is itching. It's like, yeah, you know what? I like being single. I enjoy being single since the first time I had sex since I had sex at the Boy Scouts, and everyone's like looking at him since he said it out loud. I can't remember. I don't think it's specifically that line, but it's funny as hell. And then whenever, gosh, my nose is really itching that bad. Anyways, getting to the funny stuff, the gags. Basically, when they try to track down the savage guy, it's funny how Nordberg, gets caught up whenever he tries to put the tracer, but the clothing gets caught up on the part of the tailpipe, and he's dragged across with Savage's car, then somehow comes loose and ends up underneath Frank's car, and he's being dragged underneath that for a while. And Frank and Ed are thinking that maybe he is that he's Savage, but they're unbeknownst to them, it's actually Nordberg. And then somehow Nordberg is able to get free of that and ends up underneath the bus for a good while. And then another funny part, if I remember this correctly, whenever whenever Drebin encounters Hapsburg yet again, the expressions that Hapsburg make whenever Frank says, "Yeah, you're just as much as the truth hurts when as much as 50 states." Damn it! I can't remember. I can't remember. I hate that. I can't remember this. The truth hurts because as much as let me look. I'm going to look at the clip. I'm sorry, folks. I need to remember. I thought I had this down, but there's just too much humor here. It's when Hapsburg has captured Jane.
I don't care.
Okay, we're going to watch this here.
You're not going to talk your way out of this one. Go ahead, threaten me like you have the American people for so long. But it's not going to work this time. You're part of a dying breed, Hapsburg. Like people who can name all 50 states.
Yeah, you're part of a dying breed, Hapsburg. Like the people that can name 50 states, or whenever the truth hurts, with a bicycle without a seat, still hurts, or something like that. Let's hear that.
The truth hurts.
Yeah, let's hear it again.
Hapsburg. Oh, sure. Maybe not as much as jumping on a bicycle with a seat missing.
Yeah, jumping on a bicycle with the seat missing. And then apparently, whenever Frank wants to, how should I put this? Whenever Frank turns down that position to be, the head of a police squad, he's like, "You're gonna meet the new environmental Frank. I want to eat a sea otter without throwing up, or I want to go. All the Frank Juniors can go in there and live underneath the shade, or go in with a 7-Eleven without an interpreter." And just damn, I can't believe I forgot that, but. It's just a hilarious, fun film, and you're guaranteed a good time. And the funniest one was whenever Frank and Meinheimer are captured. Apparently, whenever Frank is trying to get the ropes off, and he's brushing himself against the shelf, this steel, some kind of steel shelf, and apparently the professor's pitted against that shelf somewhere. Basically, all this stuff starts falling on him, like six, not baseball. Well, actually, first a baseball bat falls on him, then like 6 baseballs fall on him, and then right after that, the pool, whenever you play pool, those balls. All those balls fall on his head as well, and then eventually some oil falls on him, like somehow the oil, I don't know, a lot of oil falls on him, and then apparently a lot of the styrofoam stuff that you would use for shipping falls on him, and then before all that, apparently some metal pieces fall on him, and then apparently I think a large weight falls on his head. So yeah. He even mouths off to Frank like, "What the fuck are you doing?" And then whenever earlier, right when I forget. Before all that, whenever Hapsburg and Frank end up talking, he's whenever one of them smells like, "What's that smell?" And he's like, "Raw sewage. I love it," and that's supposed to be the sign for the police squad to come in there. And apparently. When Nordberg tried to cut the power, I forgot to mention this. Nordberg cuts the power, but somehow he's stuck on the ledge of the pole. And whenever they try to get out, they don't realize that their doors are actually right in front of that pole, and they can't get out of there. And then earlier, I forgot to mention this too. Whenever Leslie Nielsen, before he breaks into the Hexagon headquarters, he's trying on these new diving pantsuits, and they all fly off, and he's trying on 6 pairs already. And then when he finally is able to get the suit on, he goes through the raw sewage. And what else? Whenever he tries to first break in, he actually has 2 harpoons. He misses the first time. He actually hits the part where it says high voltage. Then the second time it goes on the other side, but there's several dogs there, and they're wearing this I guess what you could say leather strap on them, and the harpoon catches on that. And when Frank's trying to pull himself up, he's also pulling that dog at the same time. And eventually, when he gets on the roof, he encounters that dog, and eventually he tries to run away from it, and he falls down and encounters Hapsburg and the henchmen as well. And then right after police squad rescues them, Ed notices what's happened with Professor Heimer with all that stuff falling on him, the oil and the styrofoam. He's like, "Look, oh God, look what they did." And then whenever one of the henchmen actually stayed and was guarding them, he encounters them, and he's like, "All right, I've had enough. You're about to meet John Q here," and you can hear actually Frank tries to warn Frank tries to warn Ed about this, and you hear some punching going on, and you see the expressions, both Nordberg and Frank's, and eventually when they cut to the scene, it's actually the captain or Ed on the floor, and the henchman is actually the guy that beat him up, not Ed, which I thought was hilarious. Then later on, when they're at the press dinner club speech, whenever Frank thinks it's the false Meinheimer, he's like, "This guy would not have a birthmark that looks like his mother on his right butt cheek." And when he rips his pants off, there's actually a birthmark. He's like, "Obviously a forgery," and he gets like this towel and starts to scrub on it, and and Meinheimer's yelling in pain, and then he gets like a buffer and tries to like buff it out. It's hilarious. And of course, right at the tail end, whenever Frank is, giving the speech and, proposes to Jane and all that stuff, he goes up on this view, and he sees a whole bunch of people, he's waving, and then one guy tells Frank to turn around, he accidentally knocks off Barbara Bush again. Then Frank actually notices and tries to grab for her, but actually grabs her entire dress off, and you see her undergarments, and that's how the film really ends. But yeah, I think all the actors do a great job, and all the slapstick and the laughs, they're all there. It's just still fun to this day. I feel like I'm missing something. Oh yeah, Weird Al Yankovic's cameo. I was going to get to that. Weird Al Yankovic does appear, like whenever Frank is heading into the office, and they cut to the scene where Weird Al Yankovic's character is actually threatening the police squad. He's like, "Say your prayers," and then Frank busts open the door and then knocks out Yankovic's character. But damn, I feel like I'm missing something here. And I don't want to, because every gag and slapstick humor is just hilarious as hell. I wish I would remember more of the interaction between Hapsburg and Frank, because anytime Frank said something a little bit on... Oh yeah, when Frank actually talks about, when he meets Jane again for a good while, he talks about, yes, it's like having sex. You always think it's going to be good, but it always turns out to be like rough in the end or something like that. But yeah, I don't know what else to say. But otherwise, if you haven't seen the sequel, give it a watch. If you have seen it, go see it again. It's definitely well worth it. It's definitely your typical Leslie Nielsen type humor that you'll definitely enjoy. I can see why this definitely excelled at the box office. It was fun. It was. I don't know what else to say, other than the fact that its humor and slapstick and gags still hold up to this day, still hold up 28 years later. It's definitely well worth it. And I'll eventually get to the third one soon, and I definitely enjoy them. I think, in all honesty, I don't think there's any, there's no really any bad stuff in this film, other than the fact that we probably won't get to see these films made anymore, because they'll probably not be PC these days. It's got to be fart jokes every time, left and right, and all this bullshit. And oh yeah, I probably should give a mention this. Most of the actors in this film are pretty much gone. Like Leslie Nielsen died in 2010. Robert what's his face? Goulet, who played Hapsburg, he died back in 2007. The guy that played Dr. Meinheimer is also dead. And probably the guy that played the scientist is also gone too. And George Kennedy died like 3 years ago. So pretty much most of the cast members in this film are gone. And it sucks. But you know what? I got one more film to review, and that's going to be the third one. And I'll get to that soon, hopefully today. I can't remember if I mentioned this earlier, if I actually did a review. I did review this film yesterday, but I wasn't satisfied with how it turned out, so I figured I'd go ahead and do another review, and I think I'd be a lot more alert and awake, because towards the tail end of that review, I feel like I was getting a little tired. But hopefully you really liked this review and of what I gave and my thoughts on this film, being still holding up and still being a fun, joyous film. I think you can watch this on YouTube, but if you can find this trilogy, for cheap on Blu-ray, I'd say go with that. It kind of sucks there's no extras, and apparently what I discovered earlier today, there's actually a documentary on it, on the making of it. If that's the case, go ahead and watch it. I'll probably watch it at some point. But yeah, I think I'm going to wrap it up, and hopefully the people who are subbed and who are just now, and the people who have been watching, hopefully you like this review, and if you like what I do, you know, I'll do more of them, and just give me a chance, you know. I will not disappoint you. Okay, I'm going to end it here, and I will see you for the next one for part 3. So I will see you in another video, folks. Later.